All right. Well, good evening, everybody. It is April 30th, 2025.
Recording in
This is
progress.
a public meeting of the Portland Committee on Community Engaged Policing. It is actually a full committee meeting. And I'm going to turn it right over to our co-chairs, Odelia and Devante, to get us started with the meeting.
Hi, I can start. My name is Odelia Zuckerman. I use she, her pronouns. One of the co-chairs of the full committee of PCCEP, and I'll pass it to Devante.
Hello, everyone. Devante Manyweather. I am the other co-chair of the full committee for PCCEP. Appreciate everyone coming tonight, and then pass it off to other PCCEP members so that they can begin to introduce themselves.
My name is Tia Palafox. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the co-chair of the Policy and Reform Subcommittee. I've been a member since 2021.
No, I guess that's a good intro for me. My name is Kip Silverman, he, him pronouns. I am the other co-chair of Policy and Reform Subcommittee, and I'm on mobile, so I can't really see who to pass it off to easily. So someone jump in.
I'll go. My name is Carrie Driver. I am a PCCEP member and I use she, her pronouns. I'll pass it to Viva.
Hi, good evening. Viva Campo, she, her pronouns, and PCCEP member. I will pass it to, I think Jorge's here. Camera's off, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm here. Jorge Sanchez Bautista, he, him, and youth member of PCCEP. And I will pass it to Conrad.
Thanks, Jorge. Conrad Hewlin, PCCEP member. I sit on the Policy Reform Subcommittee. Sorry, he, him pronouns. And I don't know if I see any other current members on the board. Oh, sorry. Sorry, Ashley.
Oh, no worries, no worries. No, I know. So yep, sorry, I'm Ashley Schofield. I use she, her pronouns. I'm currently a board member, PCCEP member. But as I've told the other PCCEP members, this will actually be my last day as an official PCCEP member. I am stepping down to, do all the other things. And quite honestly, just to let you all know, just so that I can go to baseball games on Wednesdays for my son, just sort of enjoy that kind of life right now. And that's what I need to do. So yeah, not about me, but just wanted to close that out. So thank you.
Yeah, we'll miss you so much, Ashley. You've brought so much to this group. And yeah, I guess let's move on to city introductions. Like Dory said in the chat, if you're on the panel later or like speaking later, no need to introduce yourself now, but if you're not, please go ahead.
I actually have not introduced myself yet. I'm Noelle Cuthair. I am on PCCEP, a board member, as well as I am the co-chair for the Community Engagement Subcommittee. I'm going to be on mobile as well, but I will join later on.
Sorry about that. Thank you. Pass it to Dory to start us off.
Yeah, I'll start the city intros and any monitor folks and yeah, anyone not speaking later can jump in after me. I'm Dory Grubinski. I'm the PCCEP program manager, and yeah.
Good evening, Mary Claire Buckley, Portland Police Bureau.
Hi, I'm Sarah Ames, she, her pronouns from the City Attorney's Office.
I'll go ahead and go. My name is Corey Wilson. I'm currently a Deputy Chief of Emergency Operations at Portland Fire, and I will be taking over as the Deputy Chief of Chat beginning on May 8th for Stephanie Sullivan.
I'm Michelle Lavinia. I'm the Community Health Nurse Manager for the Chat program, and I'm on mobile, but will be joining shortly online.
I'm Tony Slidham, budget analyst for PCCEP.
Christopher?
Christopher Taft, Senior Aide to Mayor Wilson.
Awesome. Is there anyone else? And community members, please introduce yourselves in the chat as always. And we can move on to the agreements. Devonte, if you want to read those off.
Yeah, so we have for the community agreement, we have listen actively and respectfully, share airtime, be present and open to new information and perspectives, assume positive intent, respect each other, respect the group, speak your own truth, communicate directly, honestly, and respectfully, ask questions to clarify, call out bias, and be okay with ambiguity. So just kind of a general overview of today's meeting. We'll start off with just some updates. Then we'll be getting into the PPB 2024 annual report, in which we'll have Representative PPB to kind of go through that with everyone. Also, we wanted to get into the state of citywide behavioral health response. We have some folks here from different parties to kind of provide insight to everyone and kind of help to carry that discussion a little bit. And then we'll finish off the night with open public comment. And did you want me to get into this part, Odelia?
Yeah.
Sure. So first update, full committee chairs, Odelia and myself did have a meeting with Mayor Wilson earlier in April, so earlier this month, to kind of discuss PCCEP's work and the mayor's public safety vision and how those things can intersect and how we can kind of cooperate and collaborate to make sure that our efforts are efficient, as efficient as possible, where possible, and just to kind of get a better understanding of the mayor's vision with the change of administration. For the following update, we had myself and Odelia also met with Councilor Canal and Novick, who serve as the co-chairs of the Community and Public Safety Committee for City Council. And so we were able to kind of have some discussion and kind of see what their thoughts were, what their visions are, kind of similar to the meeting with Mayor Wilson, explain a little bit about PCCEP as a committee and what we're looking to accomplish, and just kind of looking for those intersectionalities and how we can cooperate with them as well. And then we also, PCCEP leadership hopes to meet with all the members of City Council to establish working relationships. That's really our goal, is just to start to build those working relationships as we talk about how we're going to do our work and start to do that planning. That way we can form those relationships and really get a lot of things accomplished and have that positive impact for our community. No, Dilly, if you want to take this one.
Yeah. So, on May 28th, the new independent monitor team will have their first town hall. And for those of you familiar with the COCL, it's a continuation of that monitoring of how the city's doing in relation to their compliance with the settlement agreement. So that'll be on May 28th, and we're gonna co-host it with them. Yeah, it's gonna be, I believe, hybrid. The location will hopefully come out soon. And they're going to present their report card, for lack of a better word, I guess. And also I think they're really interested in soliciting feedback from the community in general of like things that are happening with police and anything people want the monitor to know, they seem really open to hearing about. So we're looking forward to hosting that with them and hopefully getting some community turnout. Yeah. Then we also just wanted to take a moment.
I think
and-
Tia was
yeah, I'm
gonna.
gonna.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
will-
Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, Tia's gonna lead this slide, but we just wanted to take a moment to commemorate Dan and all of his work. And I'm gonna pass it to you, Tia.
Okay, thank you so much. For those of you who do not know, Dan Hendelman of Portland Cop Watch died on April 9th of this year due to a stroke. Many of us found out that evening at a PCEP meeting and were in shock. But we wanted to take a few minutes to honor him tonight. I want to, oops. Sorry, I'm copying something really quick. I don't know. I'm here. I'm putting something in the chat as I go along here. The memorial service will be held for him on June 28th at Clinton Street Theater at 11 o'clock. And I put in the RSVP link there if you'd like to attend that. And Dan attended every PCEP meeting and only missed a meeting when they conflicted with other policing related meetings. Dan was a major contribution to police accountability system that is currently being stood up and had been pushing for reforms in this area for decades. Dan started attending PCEP meetings in 2012 when it was created. He was first attending the Community Oversight Advisory Board. Prior to that, the advisory board that came before PCEP. I talked to a couple people close to him. Debbie Iona of the League of Women Voters said he always did have something to say because he was a close observer of public bodies involved with police oversight and had an encyclopedic memory. And I also talked to Philip Chachka of Portland Cop Watch, and he said Dan was kind of all over the place, talking to police accountability activists and assisting in any way that he could. Dan was indefatigable and kept putting hours and hours each week into unpaid and often thankless tasks of tracking policies, police misconduct, attending meetings, and trying to build community accountability of the police. As you can see here, he was a member of so many different organizations, and I know he'll be truly missed. So we'd like to share with you. Also, I talked to Dan's brother, Matt Hendelman, and he gave permission to share a very detailed Facebook post. If you would like to copy that link and look at his Facebook page, it shares all the details of what happened and so much more. So that is a really good link. Also, there were several articles in many newspapers in Portland, but I thought the article with the considerable amount of information and pictures was this one here, OPB. So I wanted to include that article. Although there's many more, but we didn't have room to make a slide for all the things that we had about Dan. So those were the biggest takeaways I had to share with you tonight. Something I'll say really quick is he always reminded us of phrases not to use. Like he would say, please don't use bullet points. And when we said, oh, shoot, when we forgot something. And those are some of the things, if I start to say them, I'll think of Dan. It was just kind of cute, but he was just so aware of everything. He was an incredible man, and I know I'll miss him a lot. I feel really lucky being a stroke survivor, so it really hit me really hard. So I wanted to definitely bring him up tonight and say that we'll miss him. If anyone else would like to share anything, those were the things I wanted to share tonight. Thank you.
I think yes, hopefully we may have more time for that at the end of the meeting, but thank you so much for sharing that, Tia. That's really nice to take that time and honor such a major contributor to this body of work and this community space. Absolutely. So thank you for that, Tia.
you.
And I think in the interest of time in this packed meeting, we'll move on to the next update.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Tia, for sharing that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So more, yeah, news that's not good. Bad news, in my opinion, personally. Trump issued an executive order on Monday night about strengthening and unleashing America's law enforcement to pursue criminals and protect innocent citizens. I recommend to everyone on here to read it in full. I think a lot of what's on there is really scary and impacts policing in so many different ways, impacts the settlement agreement, so many things. But specifically, one part that stuck out to us that's quoted is, within 60 days of the date of this order, the Attorney General shall review all ongoing federal consent decrees, out-of-court agreements, and post-judgment orders to which a state or local law enforcement agency is a party, and modify, rescind, or move to conclude such measures that unduly impede the performance of law enforcement functions. So, yes, like there's also multiple things related to police accountability, right? And this brings up, I think, just so many questions for PCEP. We haven't had the chance to talk about it yet, so I'm not going to speak on behalf of all of us as a committee, but definitely for me, it's really concerning. The settlement agreement is still not in compliance, and so for that to go away early would just be unfair, I think, to people who worked so hard to have it come about in the first place. Then I think also, like, I'm sure the city has questions, PPB has questions, of like how this is going to affect our city and also the country overall. And so, something that's really important to Devontae and I that we got to talk about a little bit is just being able to stay on top of those things and ask those questions and be that conduit of information to the community, and like asking PPB, the city attorneys, the mayor's office about this. I'm not sure if anyone has any answers yet. So, and I know this is our first meeting, for it feels like kind of weird to talk about anything else except this for hours, but also we just don't really have the answers yet. So this is something that's definitely going to stay on PCEP's radar, and probably we foresee us doing like a fair amount of work and events and outreach on this. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at with that. Sucks, pretty much.
Do other PCEP members have any comments or questions on this area before we move on? I know it's a really big development, so just want to give a little bit of space before we move on.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, yeah, I'll do hands. Good.
Good.
Go ahead, Kip.
Yeah.
Yeah, hi. So since it's brand new, like Delia said, we haven't really had a chance to discuss, but we'll likely have more to talk about, and will be on one of the agenda items for the policy and reform subcommittee meeting coming up. And there's a lot in that executive order that raises tons of questions, like Adelia said. But we'll focus on, at least so far, what brief discussions we've had. We'll focus potential impacts to Portland and possible other approaches. And I appreciate how Odelia had commented that There's been years of really hard work put into this by the PPB and the community and the city, and it would be we'd be remiss if we just let that drop. So looking forward to future conversations about this.
Thank you, Kip. Go ahead, Jorge.
Yeah, I think my question was, seeing that this was 2 days ago, I'm assuming we haven't heard anything else. I'm assuming it was just kind of like a, where are we right now with that kind of news? Or do we know like what the kind of next steps are with the city or DOJ, state DOJ, anything like that?
Yeah, I guess. Oh, yeah, Stephanie, I was just gonna ask you. So perfect.
Yeah. Honestly, I know that this is totally sudden, and this among the many major impact orders we're seeing from the federal administration, we're constantly monitoring those. So no, we haven't had a minute really even to kind of digest what that means. I think there's no action at this point until the DOJ takes some action. And so I don't expect that there would be any action before 60 days, but if we can invite the DOJ attorneys that could probably provide better insight into what's happening on that end. I don't know if we have any of them with us tonight, but as of right now, the city has not a lot of clarity on what this means or what next steps actually look like. I will say though, I see one of your questions, Odelia, in the chat, which is about the CBPA, and I'll just say that exists in city code, so that that is not immediately impacted by this direct order, but that exists in city code regardless of what this executive order says. So that much I can at least say with confidence, and maybe Sarah Ames would have any additional thoughts on that, or others.
Thank you, Stephanie, for the clarification.
All right, Devontae.
Yeah, obviously incredibly shocking news, and I mean it's so fresh that I didn't count on any of the parties present to really be able to provide insight on what the next steps are going to look like, and how that would impact the consent decree here locally, or the efforts that have been being made, the discussions that have been being had, with all the different parties coming to the table. But I just want to say, and I think many of my peers, the committee would agree with me that regardless of what this ends up meaning for the consent decree, that we have seen a lot of good work and progress come from PPB in the city, and there have been some extremely good faith efforts made, and even if the dissent decree were to go away, I would hope that PBB and the city would continue to make those very strong efforts to engage with community, to consider community perception, and just to kind of bridge that gap, to continue to do that good work, and honor the legacy of all the good work that's been done up to this point. I obviously I don't think a dissent decree for the city of Portland looks good, but I think that most would agree that getting out from under that, through the merit of the hard work that's been done by PPB and the city, would be better, and a better impression on the community than to kind of get a free pass, so to speak. And so I would just hope that everyone would keep putting their best foot forward to kind of come to the table and meet and figure out positive solutions to make Portland a better and safer city for the residents here. So that's all I would say about that. Yeah.
Ashley.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I am curious. We've got a good attendees today. Thinking Christopher or Sarah, what are you hearing from the, mayor? Like, what are our values set around this, and how would we, my understanding is a lot of municipalities are, you know, they're meeting or they're meeting in advance to all this chaos that's happening from the federal government. So curious if you can give us some information around what the city plans to, you know, be part of what happens, right? Like, you know, other cities are standing up, right? Like, what are we going to do about how we protect what we know is right? And, you know, my understanding is Mayor Wilson doesn't know much about PCEP, and I know we're still building that relationship. So, you know, curious how much the settlement is in their mind and how important it is to, you know, this community engagement around policing and what our values here in Portland. So if you guys don't mind, I'm going to put you on the spot. And I know you might not know a lot, but like, just want to know if things are being talked about.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Ashley. I'll just chime in. Like Stephanie said, we're a little bit scrambling, and the mayor has yet to get a good briefing from all the knowledgeable parties and all the stakeholders. But he has signaled, not like Devontae said, not interested in getting a free pass, and definitely doubling down on all the hard work that that this group and all the predecessors in this group have done before, and not just walking away from this. But again, like Stephanie said, we're waiting to figure out and give him a full briefing on all aspects of this, and just sort of in waiting and seeing mode, if you will.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Hi, I would just say from the perspective of the city attorney's office, we are continuing to work on the settlement agreement as if it's going to last until we're done. And we are right now working very closely with the monitor in helping get him the final information he needs to prepare his report. He plans to put out the bulk of his report tomorrow. And prior, you know, so 4 weeks to review before you get to the PCEP meeting towards the end of the month. And in our brief conversations with the U.S. Department of Justice, they do not have any further direction. They are the attorneys working on the cases. They are not in the central attorney general's office making the decision or reviewing these cases. So we haven't gotten much more information from them.
Conrad?
Yep.
You're muted.
Thank you. Just really fast, I was just going to mention this is so great that we have this policy and reform subcommittee. I'm really excited to work with our wonderful subcommittee co-chairs and the rest of that team. Where hopefully we'll have a little bit more information and we can work on preparing ourselves as we just continue to move forward. Obviously, anything from an executive order will have to come through it looks like acting U.S. Attorney for the District of Oregon. In their office. So I think we're in good hands as we navigate this, and I just wanted to share that publicly.
Thank you. Yeah. I guess just to wrap this up, like one of the parts of the settlement agreement still not in compliance is the use of force. And like I feel like that just speaks to the need for there to be some of this like still exist. And I don't have much faith that the settlement agreement will still exist after 60 days, but I do think we as a city can come together and like the mayor's office, council, city attorney's office can still create paths and ways for accountability that kind of have that follow through. And so that's something that I hope we can all like be thinking about and talking about how to keep this accountability alive, even if the settlement agreement goes away, because it's so important. And no matter what happens at the federal level, we can still do things at the state and local level. So I think that that is just something to keep in mind. But yeah, can move on to the next slide, please. All right, so PPB released their annual report, and so we have Assistant Chief Lavelle here to present on that report and answer a few questions. So we can just get started with that if you're here.
All right, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Awesome, great. Thanks for having us tonight. It's good to see all of you. We released a draft of the annual report to PCCEP on the 7th of April. And thank you for taking the time to read it and go over it. We made a few changes to it this year. As you'll notice, it is shorter. We tried to make it more readable and more digestible than previous annual reports. It does cover every division and unit within the Police Bureau. But for those who are interested in a longer format, our plan is to have a little bit more data expounded on a larger version that'll be on our website as well. We tried to meld in the crime reduction plan, and that includes the mission work that the precincts have been doing, and that's embedded in the precinct section. This includes the costs and the stats related to those missions as well. And you'll see that we used a lot of statistics throughout the entire report, just so people could get a sense of the results of the work that's we've been doing here at the Police Bureau. In recent years, our staffing affects everything we do. So in the report, we discuss how we're using evidence-based policing, data and community engagement to deter crime. We're also summarized the crime and crime trends and how we report how we're addressing it through the Bureau. And in the back this year, you'll find an organizational chart and our staffing numbers as well. As part of the settlement agreement, we send a draft to PCCEP for comments, and then we use those comments and feedback to create the final report. So we entertain and would love to get your feedback by May 7th so we could do our final edits. And then after that, we present these at precinct meetings throughout the city at our 3 precincts, where we invite community and the commanders of those precincts, and we talk to the annual report and the chief presents at those meetings as well. So we're trying to schedule those for June of this year. Once we have them scheduled, we'll share that those calendar dates with you for dissemination to your members and to folks in your networks. And as always, we appreciate your feedback on the report, and I'll answer any questions that folks may have, and definitely interested in what you think of this new format.
All right. Now the floor is open for questions. If you have any questions of Assistant Chief Lavelle or to the report, go ahead and raise your virtual hand. Go ahead, Conrad.
Thanks for joining us. Thank you, Chief. I found the amended, the abridged report. We just want to call out, appreciate that it's, actually consumable, like you can actually digest the information, so that's a win. It was super nice having the full-time equivalent table there, because I think that gives us a good sense of what's authorized or budgeted versus what's actually in the field or working. This might be a question in the minutia, and I apologize, but it just seemed weird that there's an authorized deputy chief, but none working, but it's not listed as a vacant position.
Yeah, we do have a current deputy chief. That position is filled.
Okay. Might just need to double check that that full-time equivalent table there. Okay. But yeah, appreciate that it's obviously it would be awesome to have it even more digestible, right? And but this looks like a good improvement, so thank you.
Great. No, that's good feedback. Thank you.
And to clarify, are these questions open to everybody right now or just PCCEP?
Yes, open to everyone.
Yeah, so community members, please raise your hands with any questions you have about the report or any information you'd like to see. I have a question. I just need to do a quick control F really quickly before I ask it. So just give me a minute. Hopefully other people have questions in the meantime.
Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Mark Forsey and pronouns with Portland Cop Watch. I've started. I'm probably about halfway through the long version of the report, and I'm just kind of confused about there's the two separate, the long version and the short version. The long one is all words, and the other one's got a lot of nice pictures. And I just wanted to point out the long version does not have page numbers, so I was hoping if this is going to remain be two reports that we could get page numbers on there. I think that'll be helpful for getting comments in. Are the words the same in these two reports? I guess that's my question.
They should be. I think the second one's probably just expounded more. There's been some edits that have taken place as the chief's office has gone through it. There'll be some after we get PCCEP's feedback. So there could be some versions that have different edits, but generally speaking, the bulk of it will be the same.
Got it. Thank you.
Go ahead, Charlie.
Hi, where am I? There we go. Okay, let me put my hand down real quick. I was just finding my hand to put it up. Okay, there we go. So I was wondering, can I also ask a question about this letter from the chief?
Sure.
Go ahead,
Okay.
Charlie.
Yeah, because I want to see if I can get some of this information and know where to find it. There is like the second paragraph down on the chief's letter to the community. And it says in 2024, the Portland Police Bureau implemented a mission-driven crime reduction plan that applies data-driven, so keep that in mind, approaches to focus on specific locations, crimes, and neighborhood concerns. Calls for service decreased and crime went down is in several categories compared to numbers the previous year. So much of this is done on overtime because we lack personnel to respond to calls for service, complete investigations, follow up, and do mission, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so first of all, I was wondering where this data is, and is it possible to review that? And second, is there a way to also look at what is more fiscally responsible, like overtime versus the claim that you need more policing? Thank you.
Great. Yeah, and just to give people a sense of the mission-driven work, we're talking about things like the stolen vehicle operation missions, retail crime missions, things of that nature, street racing missions. Typically, we have officers out working patrol, answering calls for service, but these missions then overlap with those officers. So we get people on overtime to assign them to these specific missions. We don't have the bodies just on straight time to do call answering and the missions. So we use overtime as a tool to staff those.
Okay. Carrie? Oh, hold on a second. Charlie, did you want to?
Yeah, I was just wondering where I could find that data that I brought up.
Yeah, that data is probably produced by our strategic services division, is my guess, and then shared with the precincts, and then they'll go out and build their missions. I don't know. A lot of our information now can be found on public-facing dashboards to give you a sense of what crime might be in certain parts of town at certain times and things of that nature. But that specific data set, I'd probably have to do a little bit more research to see what specifically was used for the mission.
Go ahead,
Thank
Carrie.
Thank you. Look forward to it.
Thank you.
I would love to see more information if it was readily available about the community engagement activities. I see data about different levels doing activities, and I see some great information about the purpose of the activities, but it would be interesting to see statistically, like where were the majority of the events and a little bit more of a breakdown for the community engagements. I think that would be helpful in the work that we do with you.
Yeah, thanks, Carrie. No, that's great. And we do have Office of Community Engagement app where officers can attend different functions, different community events or meetings, and then track that in the app. So we do keep pretty good stats on that.
Great. Viva? Oh, well, there was a community member who had their hand up. Go ahead, Viva. I'll just check in with them.
Okay. So I just wanted to ask about staffing. That's covered in the longer version report, and that's something that's always really important to me when folks don't have enough staff or money. We see agencies struggle, and it sounds like things are at the lowest numbers that it have been, but it's projected that that will change with less retirements. It sounds like it's kind of hopeful. I was curious though, kind of, do you have any problems with retention other than, you know, natural retirement? Or if you can kind of speak to that, because right now in the report just kind of sounds very like optimistic without, you know, giving a lot of data why. And I'm like, I want to be there with you. I want to believe you. Just kind of maybe speaking to a little bit more sustenance in terms of reassuring us, because that's staffing is always just so critical to doing anything else, really.
No, it is absolutely. Thanks for that question, Viva. For us, our retention is a big issue. We actually do pretty well hiring. I think we hired 74 officers last year, but typically we lose about that much in a year to retirements. That's our biggest piece of attrition. We do lose some trainees along the way too, but we have this phenomenon also in our retirement system where there's some months in some years that are more advantageous to retire. And we see big exodus in those months. And we have one of those coming up in May of next year as well. So a lot depends on how many people, you know, stay past their retirement date or leave. But our hiring is pretty steady and we're seeing an increase in the amount of applicants. So that does make us hopeful. But we hired a lot of cops back kind of the late 90s timeframe, mid to late 90s, when we started seeing crack cocaine, gun violence, gang violence, and those things in the city. We brought on a lot of people and they're all hitting retirement age right now. So that's really contributing to our attrition as well. But we are hopeful. We're going to keep doing everything we can to continue to hire. And then over time, hopefully stave off some of these retirements. We do have a program called Retire Rehire, which is at the chief's discretion, which allows some people to retire and then remain another year or 2 years past their retirement date as well. So that helps too.
If it's okay to do a follow-up question, do you have any kind of like strategic kind of initiatives focusing on the retention piece? Because I feel like it seems like a national issue, not just like a local issue, just that hiring and retention and public safety in general. And so I was just curious, kind of like, it seems like a lot of times agencies put a lot of effort into the hiring component and necessarily the retention. So just curious if you guys have any kind of like ongoing, you know, your strategic folks are kind of actively, I'm sure that's on their radar and they're focused on.
It is. And I think our biggest tool there is the Retire Rehire program, but that program is expensive and it costs, you know, additional money for there's a PERS component to it. And then those people who do enter that program remain at top step. So it's expensive to do that. And then other places use retention bonuses. They'll essentially pay you to stay longer, but that's really costly too. And you kind of kick the can down the road a year or two. So, you know, sometimes, especially in tight budgets, you have to look at, is that worth it versus, you know, trying to bring on someone who's going to be here for a longer career.
Kip.
Yeah, hi. Hang on, let me lower my, I'm still working off my mobile phone, so again, my apologies. So I did have the main I just lost the document. The main thing that I had questions about was curious about the bias crime reporting section. And again, I don't have it in front of me. I can try to dig it back up, but if memory serves, there is almost a 80% increase in reported bias crimes from the previous year. But out of the number, if memory serves, 162 or 163 were investigated, leaving about 400 or so that were not. And I'm really curious about the difference between bias crimes that were chosen to be investigated versus non-event, which I think was one of the terms, and how other events fall into a different category. And also, there's not a lot of information about the size of the team and the processes around that, other than a mention of major crimes. And I would like to understand how bias crimes dovetails upwards into the major crimes unit. I know there's a lot in there, but I'm having to go off memory.
No, that's great. That gives me something to work off of. And I'm not an expert on the bias crime side, but I'll say this: we get a lot of reports of bias crimes, and then when we do our investigation screening of those, sometimes it turns out that they're not actually bias crimes. So they end up kind of falling out of the bias crime realm and get reported as something else, like a robbery or some other type of crime that's not bias related. So I think that's where that number trickles down. But I think this might be a good area that maybe we can expand upon more for the final report and talk a little bit about that unit, how they're constructed, and give people a little bit more kind of information around that.
I think that would be great, especially with some of the national trends we're seeing and how we know this is bias crimes and different takes are all over the news constantly. So feels like it's more pertinent to have more dialed in information. And I'll provide some feedback that's more specific around it that I think would be helpful to see. So thank you.
No, that's great. And we want people reporting these crimes. I think it's a lot of times people might be hesitant because they're like, well, maybe it's not a crime, or maybe I shouldn't report it, or there'll be other issues with it. We want people to report this so we know about it and can address it.
Can I ask a quick follow-up question on that, because you just brought up another great question about the avenues to report what individual feels is a bias crime versus someone calling 911 or someone calling the non-emergency number. Is there an avenue specifically for bias crime reporting?
I think most of ours come in through a regular call for service, like through 911, through the non-emergency, or even potentially online reporting or something like that.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Delia.
Yeah, thank you. I have a few follow-up questions. Expanding on what Carrie said about community engagement, I think I still feel confused, like in general, about PPB's community engagement strategy. And I know you guys are working on a plan, but I think I would love if you could define more directly what your community engagement looks like and what you count as community engagement versus showing up. I know there was a lot of controversy recently about like the town halls of counselors, which was in 2025, but still, like, would that count as community engagement? And yeah, so that's just kind of something I'm curious about, if you could kind of qualify what is and isn't community engagement. And then I also wanted to just mention, I feel like this has happened with previous annual reports, but I think there is not a lot of discussion about use of force, misuse of force, and deadly use of force. And I think that that's something that the community is really interested in seeing all the data and statistics on. And so for that to be more transparent and available in this report would be really great. And then just kind of in line with that, I know there's also so many questions about RRT, and I saw that was just like briefly discussed, but going into like tactics and like surveillance and technology, there was some discussion of that as well, but not really any discussion of how that could potentially be harmful or impact people. And so I think, yeah, just like kind of discussing those things more of like what's working well, what isn't working well, and like defining things more clearly for the public to see. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I think in terms of the use of force, we do put out a separate report that's pretty detailed around use of force. So that's probably the big reason we don't go into it in detail in the annual report. And our goal is really to keep the annual report kind of more a condensed report for people to digest. The RRT piece, I think it has a lot of interest, but the pieces around tactics and surveillance, we probably wouldn't get into a lot of like tactical stuff about it. We could talk about the unit, some of the tools they use and the things that they do. But I think too, for the sake of brevity too, that's something we probably keep fairly condensed. And I think Captain Abrahamson is scheduled or being scheduled to come present to you more in depth around the community engagement plan. But our community engagement kind of runs the gamut of things from community meetings to our advisory councils to the outreach that we do directly to businesses and other places, but also a lot of neighborhood meetings and things of that nature. There's a lot of kind of one-on-one things that happen with officers and community too that can fall into that category. But for us, it's really the intentional efforts to be out in community, engaging, talking about what we do and listening to their concerns and hearing what they're dealing with, how we can help and how we can be resourceful in that effort. I think a lot of it too is really about relationship building. We had, I think in years past, a lot of connection to youth, which right now is very, very limited. We don't have things like our youth services division. We used to be in schools teaching and doing those things. So those things are somewhat limited too. So we're looking for ways to kind of engage youth in crisis situations like camps and things of that nature too with sports. So I think our community engagement efforts are always a work in progress, but we're always looking for ways where we could be in spaces connecting to community, hearing their concerns and just trying to be good partners.
Debbie?
So I apologize, I have not read the report, but I'm curious if you could point me to where I'll find the information on what's required from paragraph 150 of the settlement agreement that says educate the community about its efforts in community policing in regard to the use of force and about PPB's policies and laws governing pedestrian stops and bias-based policing, including a civilian's responsibilities and freedoms in such encounters.
Okay, I think those are. Yeah, I think those are covered more in depth in the precinct briefings too. Once the report is completed, I think you've been to some of those in the past. So I think the chief typically goes through and covers those topics that relate to paragraph 150.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Jorge?
Yeah, thank you. I was just gonna highlight some of the things that Odelia and other PCEP members have highlighted about being more transparent and open up. But I do have some questions just looking over the report. I see that on the short for 2024 arrest statistics, I see the 3 precincts broken down, and then I see a section for other. For clarification, what is considered other? It's on page 26 by the looks of it. Where it says 2024. Yeah, really just like everything. 2024 arrest statistics, Central, East, North, and then I see other for 957.
Okay, my guess is that that's probably arrests that were made by people not assigned to those precincts, like traffic, some other unit.
Got it. Thank
But
you.
maybe we can make it more explicit.
Yeah, I think that would like a note that probably says other could fall under all these categories. Would probably be because I see for like 2024 average response time by precinct and priority groups, doesn't really detail that, or for 2024 calls for service statistics by dispatch type, same thing, Central, East, North, and then I see other, not much clarification there, so that would be nice if there's just a little note that says other could fall under all these other things.
Okay, I'll make it.
Thank you. And then I see on the, where is it? For PPB by the numbers, also in the short report, I see updates on the 129 vacant positions since December 31st, 2024, which is 58 officers. I was curious if there's if you know the up-to-date numbers to now. Just kind of seeing the comparison between the 2024 to 4-ish months later. If the number of vacant officers, if you know like the number of vacant officers currently right now.
I think we're right about 100 right now. But I could
So
try
the
to.
number has doubled.
Yeah, I could actually look that up though during this meeting and let you know for sure.
Okay, yeah, because if it's 100 and it was 58 vacant towards the end of the year and it has pretty much doubled.
Well, you're talking about just the officer rank, right?
Yeah, because I'm looking at the full-time equivalent and it says officers authorized is 599, working is 541, vacant is 58. So I'm curious, what is the current number of vacant officer positions?
Okay, for just the officer rank, right now we've got a total of 539 officers.
Is that authorized? Because I'm looking at the full-time equivalent, it says 599 that are authorized.
Yeah, so it'd be essentially 60 officer vacancies, and the additional ones would be at other ranks other than officer.
Got it. Okay. That is clarification. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, because we have a total sworn authorized and a number, but then we have them broken down by vacancies by rank.
Got it. Okay. Good to know. And then kind of going a little bit into the report, is there a section, not on this or maybe somewhere else, about a report from the school liaison about really their work with the school districts, or somewhere really with more details about the work that they have done with nearby schools or with other units when it comes to, youth in the streets or gang violence or etc. like that. Because I see that youth and services are under your discretion, Chief. And also see that school liaisons are also on that, and that we have 2, if I look at the report correctly. But is there like somewhere where you can direct me to where I can see that report, or if something like that would be included into this one?
That is something that we could include and expand upon. For those that don't know, we do have 2 school liaison officers, and we're in the process of trying to add a 3rd who will do half-time runaway juvenile and halfway school liaison officer. And they're a resource to MESD for any issues that are occurring in the schools throughout Portland, but they cover many school districts. A lot of the work they end up doing is around threats and threat investigation and management to the schools. I think that's something that we could maybe expand upon for this report too.
Yeah, I think and thank you for the explanation for folks. for folks to be aware, but yes, it's currently 2 school liaison officers that work with all around really the city limits, which is pretty huge for not just PPS, but for other school districts. So yeah, just kind of growing into that because I know from as a student perspective and from other parents and community members that there's a lot of questions about, safety, especially for a school like mine on 82nd. I go to McDaniel, so there's a lot of activity alongside that street among a lot more throughout Portland. I don't even have to go more into it, but everyone is pretty much aware. So yeah, just kind of seeing like more of a detailed about how the work has been with school liaisons and probably PPB with the school districts, etc. I think would give folks, especially the community, a good insight of what the work has currently been doing and where we are with progress about ensuring students and families are safe when,
Hey,
you know,
Jorge,
yeah,
the jump, and we're just looking tight on time, and we got
got
a
it.
couple of
Sorry.
hands. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry. And then one last question that I have for you, Chief, is what are the
Jorge, can we share the floor? Because we're actually past time already. So I'm gonna ask that we move on and wrap up with
Sure.
these last 2.
I
Thanks,
will
Jorge.
give it to Devontae.
Yes, and just to note, these are the last 2 hands we'll take on this section, and we'll get to our panel discussion. Go ahead, Devontae.
I'll try to make it very brief and concise. So I guess my question is, I know that PPB is still dealing with, and we said it's just a general law enforcement struggle at this time of just filling those vacancies. During a city council meeting in February, I think it was Director Cozy with BOEC did kind of briefly talk about how at one point recently BOEC was, I think, at 60% staffed. And they were able to you know, quickly close that gap there, and they are now 100% staffed. I know the hiring process is kind of similar with dispatch and law enforcement in many regards. Obviously, there are differences in the job itself, but has there been any kind of collaboration between PPB and maybe BOEC to kind of see exactly what strategy or methods they use to fill a lot of those vacancies? I know that it's very difficult and challenging, but I was just wondering if there's been any sort of collaboration regarding that.
Yeah, we do talk with BOEC and Director Kazi. I mean, they've made some great strides in filling their vacancies and getting folks through training. They do have less vacancies to fill than we do, so that makes it a little bit easier. But they've done some really good work, and we do talk with them. Our processes are a little different for the requirements to hire people and things of that nature. But we are in regular contact because we all fall under the DCA's office. So it's all the 4 public safety bureaus. So BOEC, fire, PBEM, and police are very, very closely connected.
Thank you. And Leslie. Leslie, if you're speaking, we cannot hear you.
If she can put her question in the chat, I can get it later.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, I just have a comment about something that can potentially be added to the report. Understanding that we want to increase transparency as with the community, as well as that this report will live independently in different areas. I was wondering if it would be possible to add some direct contact information for people that might be accessing the report directly. I'm sure it's on the webpage where this report lives, but if it's shared independently, that would be really useful. That way, if people throughout the year or have access to this report, they can reach out and ask questions specific to the report with some direct contact information.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else,
Yeah.
Leslie?
No, that was it. I just wanted to see if that sounded like it was a possible addition.
Yeah, that might be. I don't know if it would be direct to a person, but I think to some of the different units and different divisions, that might be possible. But I
Great.
can find
Thank you
out.
so much.
I think that's a
Yeah.
good question.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Cool. All right. Well, yeah, it's always better to have more questions than fewer. So thank you everyone who shared, and I think we might have some lingering questions too. So we'll collect the questions that have been shared in the chat as well, and PBB has received these questions in the meeting directly, and we'll send the ones in the chat to them too. And then I think we're going to share a link here where if anyone has any additional ones, you can use our open public comment form and we'll forward those along. But yeah, thank you everyone for sharing. Great feedback. Yeah, there isn't always as much feedback on some of these, so glad to hear it. Yeah, and then we'll kind of abruptly transition into our next portion, which will be kind of the main part of the meeting tonight. And we have a lot of really great people joining us for this discussion. But first, I'm going to pass it over to our co-chairs to kind of introduce sort of the thinking behind why PCCEP is having this discussion. So go ahead, chairs.
I can jump in, Odelia, and fill in the blanks.
Perfect.
Sure. So we recently had the screening for Alien Boy, Life and Death of James Chassie, which was, incredibly impactful and quite frankly hard to watch. And we didn't have much time at the end of the screening for any kind of discussion or discourse, kind of just decompression. And so we kind of wanted to use tonight as a space to invite people who are involved in behavioral health interventions with the city, different groups, to kind of speak a little bit more about that. The settlement agreement is in place due to a history of the city and PPB and other parts of the behavioral health responder system not successfully tending to the needs of those in crisis sometimes, and that it's challenging. And we do have a lot of different organizations that are currently active today in the city, but it seems like there is a lot of concern about how effectively the different groups collaborate and navigate rendering these services to the people in need. And also a lot of people, community members in the city simply are just confused and not always able to discern the different functions of the different groups. And so we just wanted to kind of chat about that and where we are now as a city and having an effective responder system in place for people who are experiencing behavioral health crisis. So um, Odelia, if you wanted to add anything to that.
Yeah, just to build on what you said, I think, I wanted to say thank you to the MHA for kind of giving us that training to do. I think it's really crucial to watch and for everyone involved in this to know about James Chassie and that shouldn't have happened to him, period. And so I think a lot of questions and a lot of different topics of conversation came from watching the film, which we obviously cannot all cover in one day. I think other things we're also really interested in is like discussing arbitration and discipline for police, specifically as it relates to the police union and the city attorneys and what that process looks like. And yeah, tonight we also just really want to learn more about policy, and especially like we've seen, obviously PSR is always a big topic of conversation, especially right now with the mayor pushing more funding to it and the conversation in council to make PSR a co-equal branch. And so I think, yeah, we're just really curious, and I think we've seen other people's curiosities as well, even on council, of like what really is the relationship between PPB, PSR, and chat, and how can we expand those alternative services to support people in crisis, which is really what a huge part of the settlement agreement calls for, and what PCEP worked on in 2023 to push for PSR. And so, yeah, we've just got questions and would love to hear about how policy stands today. And yeah, I think we can move on to introducing our panelists. Yeah, so if you all want to just come off mute and introduce yourselves, that would be great, and talk and say where you're coming from in the city.
We just go down the. I'm Chris Burley, and I'm currently a captain for North Precinct, which is located at MLK in Killingsworth. And I've had the privilege throughout my career, I've going on 20 years, of being a behavioral health unit officer, or the precursor to the behavioral health unit, a sergeant at the behavioral health unit, and then most recently was the lieutenant at the behavioral health unit. I appreciate you all inviting us today, and the discussion that's occurred, and the suggestions that you provided us, and the questions. So thank you for having us here today. And my pronouns are he and him.
We're just going down the list. I'll jump in. As Stephanie Howard, she, her pronouns. I am the Director of Community Safety for the Public Safety Service area. And in that role, I get to work with the great folks at Portland Street Response, among others. And I've got with me tonight Caroline Pope, who is a community engagement and communications person, staffer at PSR. And we're eager to talk with all of you and with our other partners here with us tonight.
Great, thank you, Stephanie. So as she said, I'm Caroline Pope, she, her pronouns, with Portland Street Response, community engagement, outreach, and communication. Thanks.
And hello, thank you for having me. I am Sherry Koss with the Bureau of Emergency Communications 911, Assistant Operations Manager. She, her pronouns, and happy to be here to speak with all of you and answer any questions we can.
And I'm Ashley Lancaster. I lead the Police Bureau's policy team. I joined the Bureau in September of 2016, so I'm approaching my 9-year anniversary. I've been in my current role for about 5 years now, and she, her pronouns. Thanks for having me.
Hi, my name is Lisbeth Gerritsen. I work in the training division in the Portland Police Bureau. I've been there since 2007, so for 18 years now. And my main job is being a program manager for all of our mental health crisis response across different programs in the Police Bureau. Thanks so much for having us here. Appreciate it.
Hi, good evening. My name is Michelle Lavinia. I'm the Community Health Nurse Manager for the chat team at Portland Fire and Rescue. And I really appreciate being part of the panel.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for being here. We're really excited to hear more information about all of this. So we can go to the next slide. We kind of have this divided up into like 2 sections. So first we'll discuss structure and coordination. And I mean, yeah, I think if you have an answer to the questions, we'd love to hear it. We're not going to make this very formal and like make everyone answer each question, but please speak to the questions that you can, and however that comes about naturally is cool. So yeah, I'll just read off the questions, and then whoever wants to start can just hop in. So 1, what role has the Department of Justice settlement agreement played in shaping how mental health related calls are handled, specifically in terms of policy, training, and who gets sent out? 2, can you walk us through how the current emergency chat response system works for mental health calls? Who gets dispatched? And how is that decision made in the moment? How do Portland Street Response and other parts of the first responder network coordinate in the field? Are there protocols for when one hands off to the other, or situations where collaboration works particularly well or poorly? And then looking at the bigger picture, how should coordination between all parts of our emergency response system ideally work to ensure safety, compassion, and accountability? What structural or cultural barriers still get in the way? Yeah, so whoever wants to start can just jump in and can go around.
And as Ardelia said, you can consider these as sort of a whole. I mean, we don't need you to go down the line and answer everything. And we don't need every panelist to go down the line either. It's just sort of, if you have expertise on any of these questions or want to answer a couple of them together, we can be pretty fluid with it. These are just meant to shape and generate the discussion. So yeah, anybody who wants to get us started, go ahead.
Hi, Dory, if you don't mind, I'd like to jump in. I think it would be helpful framing to answer the first question as it kind of relates to the rest of the questions in the discussion. So again, I lead the policy team here at the Bureau. My name is Ashley. With regard to how the settlement agreement has shaped our policies, I'll tackle the policy piece and pass the baton to Elizabeth on the training piece. I think that the settlement agreement has certainly greatly shaped our mental health policy and or force related policies to policies that are sort of foundational to the settlement agreement. Not only the substance of the policies, but I would say that the settlement agreement has had a pretty profound impact on the apparatus, the policy apparatus at the Portland Police Bureau. I think we can directly tie some of the operational and process improvements to the settlement agreement in terms of having infrastructure to actually work more thoughtfully on policy and ensure compliance with the settlement agreement and engage stakeholders. So I certainly attribute some of those improvements to the settlement agreement as well. But to focus on the policies that are relevant to this discussion, looking at preparing for this discussion, looking at our mental health related policies, of which we have 4, directives 850-20, directive 850-21, 850-22, and 850-25 for reference. Looking at the history of those directives and the history of the force directive, I think that there have been some key shifts that are directly related to the settlement agreement in terms of defining key terms. If you look at our mental health related policies from 2006 to now, and I don't know officially, the settlement agreement was 2014. So 2006 to 2014 to now, some of the major changes, again, directly attributed to the settlement agreement, are defining what a mental health crisis is. It seems wild to say, but our policies at one time didn't actually define a mental health crisis. So I think that's a pretty important shift in policy. Our mental health policies draw distinctions between a mental illness and substance-induced conditions or intoxication, important distinctions as well. Looking at our force policy, I think the greatest strength of that policy to date is its emphasis on the constitutionality of the force that we use. And that's language that was absent from our policies prior to the presence of the DOJ and their investigation. So defining what constitutional force is, speaking to or putting greater emphasis for officers in their decision-making around assessing the risk that a person might pose to public safety versus their individual constitutional rights, their Fourth Amendment rights. That's very important language that I think strengthens the policy and offers protections to the folks that are impacted by our policies. Looking at our directive that's related to how we review these incidents, all incidents, but particularly force incidents, there is a pretty significant shift. Prior to the settlement agreement, we had a less comprehensive process. There were 4 criteria that a supervisor would assess when reviewing a force incident. They would merely provide a brief summary of the incident. They would assess the cost that we incurred. I don't fully understand what that means in this context, but the cost that the Bureau had incurred as a result of the incident. They would offer critiques and recommendations and then just include any appendices. That was it. In 2025, our after action review process has 11 criteria that actually involve talking to the person upon whom we use the force, assessing whether or not we provided medical treatment or did any sort of medical assessment, and if so, the treatment that we provided, documenting the injuries to the person. So really important and huge improvements to the policy. To put a finer point on this, I think one of the major changes that we can attribute both to the settlement agreement, but also just the shift in policing as a whole across the country was the introduction and the evolution of the term de-escalation. That term did not exist in our policies prior to 2008. We introduced it in our policy, our force policy at the time. More aspirational in our use of the term. We didn't really offer any practical guidance, and we certainly didn't define the term at that time. So I would say that's a pretty a big shift to now, where we not only have discussed de-escalation in more detail in policy, we've operationalized it. We've provided significant training. I think the training history probably precedes the policy language, I would say on that point. But there's clear guidance around this notion of de-escalation, which is a critical component when we're talking about our response to folks who are experiencing a mental health crisis. So I think that the DOJ settlement agreement has led, not only as it pertains to the policies that fall under the scope of the settlement agreement, I think it's had a positive impact on all of our policies in terms of putting us in a position to create more effective and instructive policies that who knows who knows if we would have gotten there on our own. I think a lot of good has come from the settlement agreement, to just put a finer point on it. But one of the greatest influences of the settlement agreement has been the emphasis on training to policy. When you have anemic policies or policies that are somewhat deficient, which I feel comfortable characterizing our policies prior to 2008 as being somewhat deficient, when you have policies that are anemic, it's difficult to provide solid training on those policies. And that's been a point of emphasis for the DOJ and the monitor. How are you training to your policy? Well, we have more effective and instructive policies that are now informing the improvements in our training as well.
That was a lot. I don't know if somebody wants to ask questions.
Yeah, that was a lot. Any questions before we tackle the training piece of the question?
Yeah. And the public can also ask questions at this time as well.
And I apologize, I'm pretty long-winded and probably could spend the entire hour and a half talking about policy. So, Devontae.
Yeah, I really appreciate the thorough response, Ashley. I think that it was extremely helpful. To some of the information you provided was good reference, and I guess the part that I didn't hear answered is how has that altered who gets sent out? Especially in relation to all these other behavioral health groups or units, organizations that we have now, like CHAT or PSR. I know that now PPB does have their officers that are specially trained to respond to mental health incidents or crises. How are we differentiating whether it should be one of those officers that goes out or one of these other groups? How is that being filtered?
So I'm going to tee it up for Elizabeth just to say that prior to, I don't have the exact date, but prior to the settlement agreement, not all officers were required to receive CIT training. So that's an actual concrete change in policy that occurred.
Yes,
Elizabeth.
So I'll give a little history about that. And some of you who've been to our community academies have probably heard about that. But prior to so in 2007, so after Mr. James Chassie died, we changed very significantly how we trained police officers in crisis intervention. Prior to that event, we were training only volunteer groups of officers to take CIT, what we call CIT or crisis intervention calls. After 2007, the mayor at the time convened a task force, and community members got together with advocates and DRO, Disability Rights Oregon, and recommended that we train all of the officers who are on the street working in our crisis intervention response protocols. And we did that. So in 2007, all the officers on the street would have CIT training. That changed significantly with the settlement agreement. During the settlement agreement, again, the community weighed into the agreement. There were many conversations, and essentially the recommendation was made and stipulated in the settlement agreement that we would train another layer of officers. So we have our CIT officers, which is all officers who are patrolling, and the sergeants as well. And then we've added another layer of training and officers who are specially trained to take mental health crisis calls, and especially ones that have some high intensity to them. And they are called Enhanced Crisis Intervention Trained Officers, or ECIT. And so that's sometimes confusing in the community, but CIT is all the officers, and our ECIT officers are officers, Devontae, to your question, who can be dispatched by BOEC. And BOEC should talk more specifically about that. But there are dispatch protocols for that officer, the ECIT, more trained officers. That is absolutely a result of the settlement agreement. The other layer of the settlement agreement was that and again, as Ashley mentioned, I am very grateful for the agreement in that it stipulated that we have a behavioral health unit within the police bureau. Part of the behavioral health unit are our behavioral health response teams. Those are teams with an officer and a clinician that do follow-up to cases in the field. So they do follow-up and connect people to resources, hopefully to break the crisis cycle. So that's another layer of response that we have internally in the Bureau. I'm not talking about PSR or external. I'm just talking within our Bureau. We've got CIT, we've got ECIT, and then we have a behavioral health unit, which has the behavioral health responder teams. And I should say all patrol officers, so at this basic level, have access to PSR, Portland Street Response, and they have access to any outreach group, but also Project Respond. So those are points of access that police officers in the community have to these other groups. I think I'll end there for the moment.
And I'll add too that the ECIT officers are volunteers. So they volunteer to be ECIT officers. We don't select them or force them. They volunteer to go have that additional 40 hours of training on top of the CIT.
If I could just jump in. Yeah, if I could jump in, because I think that's a perfect table setting to kind of zoom out to the larger sort of framework around this. And it feels like, looking at the comments, it might be helpful while we start to address the other questions to talk about, what does BHU do? What does PSR do? What does chat do? And then maybe I'll throw out there, might be helpful to kind of walk through like a theoretical call, and then we can have our BOEC folks talk about how they triage those calls to those different responders. So if that sounds okay, it feels like a great time for Captain Burley maybe to talk about BHU, and then we can pass it over, if that sounds good.
Yeah, I think Devontae, I was looking at you, it looked like you might have had one other thing to say.
Yeah, I wanted to clarify, because that was actually more of my question, not necessarily the ECIT or what they are, because I'm slightly familiar, but more so, I guess, how is BOEC making the decision or the determination to send out an ECIT officer or one of the regular officers that just has the 40 hours of training, or if it needs to be BHU or PSR? That was more so, I guess, what I meant, and I'm sorry for not being concise enough or clear. That's what I wanted to know.
And it's complicated, Devontae, and Sherry is up there, and they have the protocols for how they dispatch us all out.
Yeah, go ahead, Sherry.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. When the DOJ agreement came out, one of the great things that happened for us was that we got to partner with our agencies and develop policies. Initially, we really worked on our mental health and ECIT policies and our suicide policy. And then as PSR came on board, our PSR policy. So just for a quick rundown on how we triage calls, a call taker is going to answer the phone, and they're going to ask questions to try to figure out what's going on. We have very set criteria for what PSR can respond on today, and I know they're hoping to expand that moving forward in the future, especially with the new funding. But initially, it was really strict criteria, and they were only available in a really small area of town. Today, they're available citywide to Portland, and they're expanding their criteria, which is fantastic. So we're expanding our policy. So if we get a call and it triages to meet PSR criteria, we set up the call for a PSR response. It goes into their queue and they pick up the call and they respond as they're able to. If PSR is not available, but it meets their criteria, we're either going to set up a police call or a medical call, depending on what we've learned through the triage process. If it doesn't meet PSR criteria, and these are going to be the calls where somebody's in imminent danger to themselves or others, or at least thought to be through the triage process. Maybe they have a weapon, maybe they're standing on a bridge threatening to jump off. Those are calls that we wouldn't send to PSR. Those are calls we want to send to the police. Our dispatchers are going to dispatch the closest police officer to get somebody started, and then they're going to look for an available ECIT officer to respond with them. Sometimes they may already have an ECIT officer going, but because they're volunteers, they're not always in the area where the call is. So we start patrol officers, we look for ECIT, and we dispatch them if they're available. And they will go across precincts. They don't have to be in the same area. And I see a couple of hands up, so I'm going to go ahead and pause.
Yeah, go ahead, Kip.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you, Kip.
We're not hearing you, Kip.
My mic was
There
off.
you go.
My apologies. I didn't want to cut your explanation short. Just want to get in the question queue. So if you had more to say, please.
Oh no, go right ahead.
Okay, cool. I did put my comment in the chat because I do want to get into the nitty-gritty of the operations. But as we heard in the public safety working group or committee meeting the other week, and different things that we've heard here in PCCEP and I've heard out in the community, there, as stated at the beginning, there is a lot of confusion about what each team or organization or first responder does and why. And I think it would be greatly helpful to have more of the explanation of how, like you're doing just now a moment ago, what team is or what BOAC decides to send which responder out and what those different teams might do. We've heard testimony and input frequently about PSR handing out water bottles and leaving. The part of the story that is missing from that is that a lot of the work PSR does is building trust relationships with people they see time and again. And that's a really critical thing for people to understand. It also is really critical when somebody sees someone in crisis and they want PSR to show up, but someone might be a danger and you have 10 people calling in and each is giving a different story, that you got 911 doesn't know always exactly who to dispatch and how those decisions are made. So there's a lot of different moving pieces to this, and I think the city could do a much better job in the storytelling. That's all I wanted to say.
Kip, did you have a question for Sherry, or you just wanted to make
It's
sure?
more, it's just more of a statement. I think this conversation with us is really important, but I think helping the public understand as well is going to be really critical. And we can do our part here, obviously.
Right.
So I think I'll just summarize a little bit. I took the questions down because I feel like maybe we just need to zoom out a little bit more and maybe start with what do these different programs do, and why, and then how do they work together, and when do they not work together, and how does BOAC make those determinations? I think that's basically what we're after for this part of the discussion. And we've kind of touched on some of those pieces already, but just to reorient, I think that's the direction I'm hearing the questions go in.
And Dory, I'm happy to kind of go back to what Stephanie kind of talked about before, and I think we were kind of way. And I really appreciate Kip's, just kind of framing for us how complicated it is when a person, I think to myself, I'm a police officer, the number of times I've ever called 911 because I've observed something, it's very far and few between. And so our partners at BOEC, as Kip pointed out, they're describing something, but it's probably a circumstance that they may have never seen before. And they're in a probably somewhat of an excited experience potentially as well. So that can be difficult to figure out who exactly we're supposed to get there, but they do a great job of gathering that information. And on the Portland police side, what Dr. Gerritsen had kind of talked about is our response is going to be determined for whether it goes to just one of our patrol officers that has CIT training, or if it's an officer that has the ECIT training. I'll ask for BOEC because they keep our criteria for when our enhanced crisis intervention trained officers are going to go. They decide when that's going to happen. And do you, just really quick, Sherry, do you have that to share right now? Or I've got the list as well, but.
I've got it right here. I'm happy to run it down. For an ECIT officer, if the subject is violent, has a weapon, is threatening to jump off of or in front of something, is threatening suicide with a specific plan and the means to carry it out, or the subject's behavior is escalating the risk of harm to self or others. Those are the criteria we use for an ECIT officer.
And so that kind of frames, it can either be, it can be any of that criteria. And I think one of the important pieces too, and that we share when we're meeting with, folks such as the National Alliance on Mental Illness, family members, and folks that have loved ones, you can always ask for an enhanced crisis intervention trained officer to respond because you have information about what's going on, and that officer will, the Bureau of Emergency Communication will dispatch them. The other piece of our continuum of response to folks in a mental health crisis is our behavioral health response teams. And that's our 5 teams that are comprised of an officer and a mental health clinician, a licensed clinician, master's level clinician. And those teams are not what we call hot response. So they're not being dispatched to a 911 call for service. Instead, they're focusing on building the rapport like Kip was talking about, identifying if the person is maybe already connected with services and how we might be able to successfully and safely do that. The folks that are being referred to BHU and are ending up as clients on the BHU caseload, if you will, even though they're not providing services, are folks in our community that oftentimes have acute, persistent mental illness. Their behavior is, it's such a state that maybe providers that do work out in the community do not feel like they can safely contact the person or do not have the means to do so. And so those folks get assigned to the behavioral health unit for various criteria, and the teams go out and thoughtfully identify how they might be able to engage the person. The mission of the BHU is to navigate and link people to services. And sometimes that does mean that a person's behavior is so dangerous to themselves or to others that a director's hold or a director's designee's hold or a peace officer hold has to take place. But a lot of the time, our behavioral health units are really successful at engaging the folks that are referred to them and being able to keep the person in the community and reintroduce the mental health professionals that have been trying to work with them or get them to voluntarily engage with or kind of figure out how they re-engage, because that's one of the really complex pieces is navigating that system and reconnecting somebody that maybe is really disorganized. Maybe they're hearing voices. Maybe they're being told not to trust anyone. And our teams are able to build that trust and figure out how they might be able to relink those folks so that they're healthier and they're better taken care of. And so I think on the PPB end, that's kind of where our continuum goes from.
You can't dispatch.
Yeah.
Again,
Thank you
BHU
for
officers. BHU officers.
sorry.
BHU officers. BHU officers are not dispatched by BOAC. They're referred. The referrals are received from other PPB officers that are going out in the field, and then they're considered for assignment to the BHRTs.
Sorry, interrupted you like 10 times. Yeah, there's some questions in the chat if you could answer those via chat, but definitely want to get time for PSR and chat, folks.
Yeah, so before we jump to more questions, we want to kind of stay in this more global part of the conversation. And we want to hear from Carolyn, and we also want to hear from Michelle as well around their engagement with this work. And so, Carolyn, could you go ahead, and then Michelle will jump to you afterwards. I know you've been in the chat a little bit, so go ahead.
Great. Yeah, thanks all. I can kind of just go over our PSR call criteria and some of the specifics. And just as a side note, Kip, yes, it is a long game here. Like it is really about multiple engagements with folks. So I thank you for bringing that up. So what is PSR available to respond to? It's kind of like the opposite list of the ECIT in a way. So we go on calls. Are a pretty common call for us. It's called down and not checked, or down and unchecked. Folks who are in active mental health crisis. What does that mean? Yelling, crying, agitated, disorganized behavior. Folks who are inappropriately dressed for the weather and at risk for exposure-related injuries. Folks who are seeking support for resources or seeking services from our aftercare team. So we have a robust aftercare team that does longer term case management after our initial first response calls. And then also we're able to respond to individuals who are, looking for, again, resources, referrals, mental health treatments, substance use, detox, wanting to connect with PSR services after having prior contact with us. What we cannot respond to is calls of folks who are actively suicidal, folks who are brandishing a weapon. That's a big one. So if a weapon is in the call description, PSR would not be sent out. Same with someone who is behaving violently. We do not respond to third-party callers for homeless encampments without any indicators of crisis. So we don't come out when someone just calls because they're upset about a camper or someone in a park, things like that. And then we also do not respond to third-party callers who are requesting supplies, resources, referrals, or shuttling. We will start doing shuttling in the future, but we will not be responding to third-party requests for that. How are our calls triaged? So BOAC explains how they triage the calls, and then they send them over to us where our supervisors are then doing the next step of triaging. Priority is those down and unchecked calls. That's what we want to check on first. Next is first responder on scene requests. So this could be from AMR, from an ambulance, from fire and rescue, from PPB. They're on scene and realize that PSR is better suited for the call. And this is where we're actually seeing a lot more of these happening. And a lot really strengthening this relationship with PPB and seeing, that they're on site and realize that we're better suited. So they will then request us to come. Number 3 is calls with multiple complaints or if there's a subacute crisis present. If you can remember with PSR, we have our mental health crisis responder, and then we also have an EMT. So we do have that medical component on the call. We're not getting calls that are strictly medical, but there's high chance that there's a medical component in part of the call. More than half of those calls have that. And then number 4 on that is a first responder partner referral. Again, that's with AMR, fire and rescue, and PPB. So that's how we triage on our side. And then, so the supervisors are looking through, they can see where responders are via, through the city geographically and sending the right responder in at the time. I can kind of start with that. And then we do have some supplies available that we are able to share We do a follow-up call to the person who made the call, initial call. So we like to prepare people that we're going to be giving them a call when we're coming into the scene, and we're, generally responding to calls that are outside. We can come into public spaces, but really the majority of our calls are outside, and we cannot respond to calls that are in traffic. So that kind of big picture, PSR, where we can go and what we can do.
All right, thank you. And Michelle.
Good evening. Thank you. Well, chat is really an adjunct to fire, and I would say that 98% of our calls originated as fire calls. So we really respond to all low acuity medical calls that are in our call response area. And with the aim of assessing and treating in the community to divert from local emergency rooms. So since our program start at the end in November of 2021, we've diverted over 30% of our call volume from local emergency rooms, which in a sense is a $10 million savings to the healthcare system. Chief Burley already said that the majority of the patient population in the Portland area, where we all really share clients, we share clients with BHU, with police, with fire, with PSR. We all we know that we go on the same clients, and we collaborate heavily during the week, during the calls, and behind the scenes during weekly meetings to share information about what is best for each client. With respect to chat, we also have a robust aftercare team in addition to overdose response teams and overdose support teams that go out. And we also have buprenorphine that we administer when people fall into our protocol. So we are bringing that to the streets, which is kind of a unique team to do it in a 911 setting. Most teams transfer the patient to the emergency room to administer buprenorphine, which is also known as Suboxone. So, so we hope to expand that work so that we can really get the medication to the people that really need it. And also, we've had clients say to us, "We know you're there, we're not ready yet." And so it is that, like Caroline said, the repeated contacts that make and build trust and build relationships with clients over time. And in time, they have come to us and they have sought us out. So, and they stay engaged in treatment longer. So we have chat does deliver that, but we really are the really in the EMS team and in the EMS lane. Whereas, like I said in the chat, most clients and most patients do not follow just a medical problem list, and they don't have just a mental behavioral health list. They have a combined problems. And in our area, most of the patients do have SPMI, severe and primary mental illness. So, and our data does bear that out. And that is why I feel like we need all of these teams to collaborate together and to go out to the right, so we can send the right responder to the right call. Chat is in service Monday through Thursday, and our aftercare team is in service 6 days a week. And that's due to our limited funding. What else can I answer about chat?
All right. Are there any direct questions about chat at this moment? We're also going to move to opening the floor up for questions as well. So if you have other questions, please go ahead and raise your virtual hand. We see you, Samat. I got you. All right. So Just want to note the chat. There's been a lot of really great conversation and answering of questions in the chat. There's also been a number of questions that have been put in the chat that may not have been addressed. So if you placed a question and maybe it hasn't been addressed just yet in the chat, this would be a great time to also raise your virtual hand, and maybe your question can get answered there. We'll go ahead and go, Smab, go ahead.
Yes, in light of the subject matter with a settlement agreement, mental health, James Chassis, I'd like to thank Chief AC Lavelle, Officer Chris Burley, Stephanie Howard, even Carolyn Pope, Sherry Koss, Ashley Lancaster, PPP Policy Director. I'd like to thank our panels and everybody here on behalf answering questions tonight. I wanted to highlight the killing of Nicholas G. Thorne on October 4th of 2004 by Portland police officers. Officer Andrew Young shot and killed Nicholas Thorne. ECIT was mid-negotiations, and it was already discovered that the subject of the negotiations, Nicholas, was holding a pellet air rifle during all of this. So clearly this man was not an imminent threat to anyone's life at the moment. And it was also apparent that he was under some form of mental duress or crisis. It's also the same officer who earlier in the same year ran through a stop sign 3 times the speed limit, striking and killing another driver crossing the intersection. So what was the breakdown that took this life in October 4th when it came to ECIT being on the scene? And how is this officer allowed to be part of an ECIT scene the same year of they're killing another person in an intersection?
Yeah, for us, I don't think it's really appropriate to talk about this discipline for certain officers and things of that nature. I think really the focus of today's discussion is more about the programs and the steps being taken in partnership around mental health.
But I would like to ask one thing. So can you give me the name and the date again? I think that I wrote it down incorrectly.
Yes, appreciate your feedback, AC Lavelle. It was Nicholas G. Thorne on October 4th, 2024.
Thank you.
He was shot and killed by identified officer Andrew Young. This was during an ECIT crisis scene where the hope that, the work with the settlement agreement since 2012 would improve crisis response. And I think this is a case that's closest to being able to understand that, yeah, under these newer systems, we would see improvements upon crisis negotiation. It took no more than half an hour from the beginning of the scene to the end for the person to be dead, unfortunately.
And just for clarity, are we waiting for PPB to respond, or that's the response?
Yeah, we don't have a response to that specific incident.
Okay. Odelia?
Yeah, I guess I think it's really great to have the clarifying information on criteria and how those things differ, especially as it comes to like the city and the mayor rolling out some new policies. It seems like those things will be changing. I guess I think it's amazing that PSR is expanding, and we've heard from a lot of officers that like they're happy with PSR expanding as well because they sometimes don't feel like they're the right ones to respond to those calls. And so I guess with this expansion, I'm just curious, especially if there's more like not case management, but whatever that is without actually being a case manager for PSR, will that in turn lead to a decline in the behavioral health unit for the PPB because PSR is filling that more?
I mean, I think that any early access prior to crisis is important. Our behavioral health response teams and our ECIT are contacting folks that are in a crisis where the Portland street response is, not necessarily designed or suited to go out and talk to them. And so I think that our behavioral health unit, the behavioral health response team specifically, currently we don't have capacity to take on all of the referrals that we're getting from officers. And so I don't, I think that I don't foresee there being a decrease for our behavioral health response team and their caseload. But I am hopeful that through PSR and the sharing that was just taking place, like our collaboration, we will be able to get the right resource to the right place at the right time. And so that folks will be connected, will decrease the likelihood that they'll get to that crisis point. I don't know.
Well, the BHU, the BHRT, so the police and clinician teams, they have in the past, and we have a great working relationship with PSR. They have in the past met about people that they are both seeing, so that to make sure that there's a handoff. So that collaboration on the line level of folks out in the field is happening.
Gotcha. Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, I think as it comes to like conversations in city council about PSR being able to respond to more calls, like specifically related to suicide calls and calls with weapons, that just feels like more than ever kind of an overlap there where because PSR is specifically like trained for these things. And I know a lot of this is also tied to the bargaining agreement and not necessarily like PPB's best capacities versus PSR's best capacities. I just kind of was wondering if there would be a shift there specifically as it relates to like weapons and suicidal ideation, because I saw like the criteria for ECIT would be if there was like intention to harm oneself, which does feel very much to me like a PSR call. I am not an expert at all, so that's just kind of my idea. So I was wondering if maybe folks from PSR had thoughts on that kind of increased potential jurisdiction.
Well, I'll say hold space for Caroline as well, but I'll jump in just to say I think first of all, these are constantly ongoing conversations, and so there's work on the call allocation study, so that's across all first responders. They're meeting regularly to talk about this and to identify call types that can be, assigned differently and what the pros and cons of that are. There's also, conversations that led to the new policy expansions that are outlined in our labor agreement with the police union, but involves police, fire, and Portland Street Response labor partners to talk about that and to talk about the scope and to talk about, how PSR, how to integrate this as an equal first responder. So I think these are going to be constantly evolving and constantly being looked at. And, I think, Carolyn, feel free to jump in, but I think hearing from the staff at PSR, I think there's, we're really trying to make sure that we listen to them and we're making sure that their voice is heard in these conversations as well, while the scope of their work is being, talked about. And so we're always wanting to get their feedback on what kinds of calls they would like to be going to or think they should be going to, or ones that maybe they don't feel comfortable going to.
Yeah, thanks. I think to add to that, yeah, it's just really about getting a lot of input from our mental health crisis responders. Um, who's missing from this conversation is Project Respond, who, we partner with a lot as well. And that brings in the component of, county, working through Multnomah County Behavioral Health. And that's who we do a lot of partnership with, as well with these SI calls. But I think it's important when we think about the weight of being able to do a director's custody hold. And that's something that sometimes comes along with some of these calls, and something that our responders are at this time not interested in doing, unless there is more conversations about it, because in the past it's been kind of dangled out, and I think responders have felt really like they didn't have any power in maybe making those decisions. So potential for evolving and changing, but really doing it really in a calculated way and not rushing anything is very important for us.
And Sherry, is there anything you want to add to this conversation as well?
Yeah, I just put a note in the chat because suicide was the one big question there. And just to clarify, for us, if somebody calls and is suicidal, but they're not an immediate threat, they don't have means right this minute to do it, BOIC will try a warm transfer to the BHCC so that a clinician or a volunteer there can work with them, and the behavioral health call center, thank you, Barb, so that they can safety plan and hopefully get the person the care that they need without having to have any interaction with a responder in person.
Thank you all. Carrie?
Thank you. I was Stephanie's last response answered some of the question, but I was curious to know, how are the groups working together to record, sticky points that need smoothing out, and then how are they meeting and planning, and are those meetings going? How would those meetings result in changes, and how would the public be included? Lots of questions, sorry.
And sorry, just to clarify, so you're talking about the policy decisions and those discussions?
Well, initially I'm just looking at when you guys are seeing that the system has improved so much. It's been so great to hear all the watch the improvements and hear all the way it's working well. What kind of mechanisms do you have to continue to talk about situations that could be improved? And then is there some sort of group that's going to meet to consistently remodel this, or how would that work?
I think there's kind of a lot of different conversations always happening. So like I mentioned, we've got the call allocation work group that's looking at that on sort of a systems level. We've got the smaller group with our labor organizations of PSR and fire and police that are looking also at how to expand the scope and those policies. But I think there's also really conversations happening on a day-to-day basis among first responders when, based on situations that arise. And, I know for PSR, we've got weekly leadership meetings where our supervisors can kind of daylight issues that their teams have seen over, the last week. And we can talk about, trying to figure out how to problem solve for that. One example I can give you that we're working on right now is seeing, some folks who are being released from emergency departments that PSR would really like to be able to try to help coordinate services for, and we're missing a connection point there. So we've had some great meetings with our healthcare partners, and we're looking right now at how to implement a software that can help make that connection point. And so there's a lot of organic conversations on, both that kind of smaller level and the larger sort of policy decision making that is happening as all of these programs grow and kind of evolve.
That's great to hear. Thank you. Awesome.
Devontae?
Yeah, lots of good information being shared. So thank you so much. And thank you, Stephanie, for stepping in to answer some of those questions that are kind of compounded with the different groups having to collaborate. I guess my question is more so for like the ECIT officers. I know that it's been mentioned that officers have to volunteer for that and to receive that additional training to respond to some of those more heightened calls. I guess my question is there any sort of level of review process currently in place for officers who are wanting to fill that role? Is there a pay differential for officers who are filling that role? And, you know, kind of similar to RRT, is there some sort of in that review process based on performance or past history where people are being denied or not being allowed to have that additional responsibility based on too many complaints or based on you know, performance issues, I suppose would be my question. Is there any level of scrutiny or just whoever wants to do it is able to volunteer to take those calls?
Yeah, so for the ECIT officers, as part of the settlement agreement, there is the officers cannot have a sustained complaint of force against a person with mental illness in the previous 3 years. In addition to that, we're contacting their supervisors, we're contacting peers to get an idea of what type of officer are they. We want an officer that is willing to go above and beyond. We want an officer that can show that they can have empathy. They can also have sympathy for the folks, and they've really got a heart of service. That's, you know, what we're looking to fill the ECIT membership roles with that type of officer, somebody that wants to step up, wants to take on extra responsibilities. As Sherry from the Bureau of Emergency Communication was talking about, if you're taking on the role of ECIT officer, you are agreeing that you're going to probably get dispatched to more calls in a shift than other officers. And you're not just going to be necessarily responsible for your precinct. You're going to potentially, if there's a shortage of officers, you might be asked to go to another precinct. So we want somebody that is able to navigate all across the city and shows the qualities of somebody that really just exemplifies the police bureau. And we do look into that, including review of internal affairs, their employee information system, as well as reaching out to their command staff, which would be their commanders, captains, lieutenants, and then sergeants, to say, hey, do you recommend this person? And, you know, I don't, as a lieutenant and a sergeant that did that, numerous times I had sergeants that said, hey, you know what, this person has the heart to do this, but I think that they need a little more time with the police bureau to better prepare them with the skills to be able to be a qualified ECIT. So I feel like we're getting critical feedback of folks, and we're also saying, hey, asking those sergeants to sit down with the officers to say, this is why we're not selected this time. We want you to build on this.
So, and Devontae,
What's that? Oh, I'm sorry.
They do not, yeah, they're not compensated. They don't get extra hazard pay or any kind of pay.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I think that's also really encouraging because I've heard, I think, a couple times in previous discussions that just that it's a volunteer group, but never heard that there was like a level of review that, you know, they have to meet the criteria in order to be, you know, designated to be as an ECIT officer. So thank you so much for that information.
Thank you for the question.
And I just
Charlie?
want to know, oh, sorry.
Go
I just
ahead.
want to know, I think the hands that are currently up are going to take us to the end of our time, just to make everyone aware.
Go ahead, Charlie.
Thank you. So it took me 2 years to get an addiction counseling degree. It's concerning that 40 hours would never have qualified me for that position. It just seems like the training is inadequate for CIT and ECIT. As witnessed personally by, and I'm not sure if these were the teams that went out to an obvious mental health crisis of a young Black woman. It was so obvious she was in mental health crisis. The problem is she had a stick. It might have been a stick that you would throw for your dog, They showed up in huge numbers, the police, pointing guns, screaming at her, like viciously, to put the stick down. And it was, beside her side. And we walked up on this scene and simply said, "Sweetheart, please put the stick down before you get harmed." And she just looked at us because, we just talked in a kind, gentle voice to her. And she put the stick down and cried. Unfortunately, we don't know what happened to her once they ran up on her and grabbed her and used what looked like excessive force. And that's pretty much what I've seen my entire life in them handling these cases. So this sounds all good, but I also watched them treat my father like that, who was also mentally ill, schizophrenia. I'm surprised he survived some of the treatment. So like, the training feels inadequate. This doesn't seem to be working fast enough. We aren't like funding the people who can save lives instead of take lives. And so these are things I just want you to think about when you're doing all this work. Have you actually been out there dealing with these folks and seeing the truth of it all? So it's not really a question. It's just my lived experience. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shirley. Noelle.
Hi, I'm Noelle. I'm the committee engagement subcommittee co-chair. I just wanted to ask about what is the ongoing training for these enhanced crisis training and intervention officers? Like, do they have to do an additional 10 years of training throughout the year or something like that? I'm just asking, after the initial 40 hours, what is the ongoing training requirements?
So the training requirements is an in-service, like most of our specialty units, there's some kind of in-service training that's usually on an annual basis. And we base that training content on the needs that we see out there, training gaps that we have. So for example, these new resources that come online, officers may not be so familiar with all the processes. So an in-service might also include providing them information on resources, all the seamless interaction with some of our partners that might be part of it. Or we might be doing scenarios that are very complex and very intense, where they have to perform in those as well. So it runs the gamut.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Odelia.
Yeah. So yeah, just to wrap up questions for you all. Again, thank you for being here and speaking to all of this. We just have one final question we wanted to ask. And I think as it shows, right, a lot of community members, people still have questions about whether these changes made in policy are reflected in outcomes for folks. And I think a huge part of that comes from fear, mistrust of police, and hope that alternatives can maybe help folks in crisis in a different way. And so I guess I'm wondering if each of our panelists, so PPB, PSR, Chat, and BOA can speak to where you see the greatest opportunities and also challenges for your organization or the system itself in further closing the gap between public safety and mental health and behavioral health in Portland. And I can put that question in the chat so it makes more sense.
Yeah. I mean, I'll answer on a very low level. I'll start with that level, which is a training level. I see a gap and a need and an opportunity for joint training we train in silos, but out there we're not in silos. And so I see an opportunity for more joint training. I'll add that as something that I see is important.
And we can turn to the other. Oh, I'm sorry, it's there. Go ahead, Captain.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to share a situation that I had that I think that was shared earlier. The importance of having trained professionals, folks that have put in years of training to help folks with very complicated situations. And this situation occurred years ago. It was a person that lived in Old Town, and he was known for acting out and being somewhat violent. Had an appearance that was described as frightening. Would stop cars, jump out in front of them, bang on them, and throw bottles. And my partner and I, a clinician, we tried to engage with him multiple times. He repeatedly refused to engage with us. And then finally, one day, we were fortunate enough to get him in a place where he was agreeable to get in the car. And we, kind of gave him the option of, do you want to go at the time? Hooper sobering existed. We believe that there was a, dual diagnosis going on there. Or he could, the other option too was, as we talked about, go to jail. We had criminal charges, or we take him back to his apartment if he agreed to stay there. He wanted to go back to his apartment. So we get to his apartment and he's in the back of the police car. And my partner and I are talking to him. And when we arrive, I tell him, hey, my partner and I are coming back tomorrow. And we want to know if you want to go to coffee with us. And it's silent in the car and I can't figure out what's going on. Then I hear him sobbing. And he says, I live in a city of 1 million people, yet I'm all alone. And so we got him out of the car. But to me, those are words that have stuck with me forever, is that there's so many people out in our community. I hear from all of you talking about the importance of the Police Bureau for trust. And I think that also is what he was speaking to, is that I don't know who to trust. I don't know who to turn to. People don't want to be with me because of my behavior. And so I think for me is just a continued call to say, we need more services. We need more accessibility and easier to access services. As I think Stephanie had mentioned, we need to have not rely on emergency departments as much, but more unities out there that can get folks prior to them getting into that crisis and being involved in behavior that would be characterized potentially as criminal. And also remembering that the vast majority, a humongous portion of the population that lives with mental illness is more likely to be the victim of a crime than the perpetrator of a crime.
And I would just say overall, in the big scheme of things, just partnership. I think a lot of times we enter these discussions and it's like, well, it's this program or that program, or there's some competition. But the truth is, we all kind of intersect with this population. We, the police, go on a lot of these calls and handle them successfully every year. PSR, Chat, Project Respond does similar work. And I think really just looking for places where we can partner and foster that relationship and see where our lanes best line up and work together is really the goal.
And I would just like to second that, what Chief Lavelle just said. I feel like we all in the city felt it during the fentanyl emergency last year. Our silos were forced to be torn down and we were very collaborative. And for the most part, from my lens, we still are today. And I am definitely a big fan of continuing to break down silos and collaborate across agencies and co-train, which is actually a theme in EMS. We do training across agencies, and being able to do that in the realm of behavioral health would be a beautiful thing.
If I could just add one thing just to emphasize what everybody else has said, it is, I think I feel really hopeful about where we are moving as a city. And I feel really hopeful by our new form of government and aligning along, you know, service areas and, you know, trying to really take down that old siloed way of doing things and working as an integrated, you know, one city kind of approach. And so all of that, I think, is going to take a lot of time to change and for people to adjust to that. But I think that is really setting up the framework for the kind of collaboration and shared, you know, shared work that's needed to really help provide these services to the community. And so I just, you know, wanted to say that. And I think that things are headed in the right direction, and we are getting better and better at working together and trying to solve these problems as a whole, instead of trying to tackle everything individually and then ending up creating a bunch of systems that don't talk to each other very well. So, but I really just want to also just say thank you to all of the folks that do this work every day and the, you know, that are here today. I think one thing I will certainly take away is that we need to find better ways to communicate what we do and to educate about what we do, and, you know, share information and make sure that the community is, you know, able to access the information about what we do. So that's been really, really helpful tonight, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Stephanie. Sherry, would you like to add to it, or Carolyn?
Yeah, I just echo what everybody else has said. And then from a BOIC perspective, we've had a lot of success collaborating with each of the individual agencies, collaborating with BHU, collaborating with PSR. We don't really have much to do with chat because they're dispatched primarily voluntarily through fire on the type codes they go on. And I just echo that we need to find a way to collaborate all together. I know Captain Burley and I have had many a conversation about a community member in crisis who is overwhelming the 911 system because they don't have the resources or the care that they need, and they don't know where else to go. And so they just continually call 911, crying out for help. And so how do we help them, and how can we all work together, recognizing privacy laws and wanting to take care of folks? We need to be able to communicate and share some information so that we can make sure folks are getting hooked up with the right care and not overwhelming our system, and in the right place, and not feeling like nobody cares when they call. That's what we would like to see. That's the biggest impact for us.
Yeah. And Carolyn, is there anything you'd like to add? I saw you put a comment in the chat.
Yeah, I put a comment in the chat, and this is something I do a lot of community presentations, and would appreciate partnering, I think, with all of you as well to kind of really share with community a whole package deal of what it looks like, of what it really means to call 911, who's going to show up, what's going to happen, what they're going to offer. If we could do those, you know, in other languages, just really diversify our outreach. I'm there. This is what I love to do. I love to talk about PSR, and I love to educate the community. So I think we should make that happen.
Okay, wonderful. At this time, we have about 4 minutes left. Want to open for, we have space for 1, maybe 2 comments for open public comment. And this is the opportunity and time for the public to make comments and make a comment or a question about anything we discussed today or other topics that PCCEP supports. All right, go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to bring up something that happened at a recent, I think it was a community safety meeting. It was Councillor Canal's resolution about supporting Portland street response. And Councillor Smith asked some questions about the settlement agreement that made me think, that our city council needs some education on the settlement agreement. And so I just wanted to bring that up here so that PCEP could think about that. Because I know like Alien Boy was part of your training. But like what do our counselors know about the settlement agreement? And I think it should affect like a lot of decisions that they make. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Apologize. Go ahead, Steve.
Hi there. Thank you everyone for being here tonight. I just have a quick question regarding PSR and all of the behavioral health responses across all agencies. Is what is the directive of the results or the purpose of a PSR call or a behavioral health call? What is the city's overall arching goal when interacting with an individual in mental health crisis? Is it to simply delay, defer? Or is it to find a way to connect services and get them actively engaged?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in first to speak to that. I think the goal is absolutely to get them connected to services and help make sure that they have what they need. I think, PSR, I'm really eager for the new policies that are in training right now, including shuttling to services. I think that's a critical piece that can help with that ultimate goal of service connection in a way that they haven't been able to do up until now. I think that's a really big piece that can help with that. And I think the goal also against the backdrop of everything we've been talking about is expanding our ability as a region to provide services to people and trying to figure out how to partner, how to support the county, or do whatever we need to do to make sure that there are resources available for people when they are ready to accept them. So the primary, I think, response for any first responder to those calls is to make sure that people are safe, make sure that they are cared for, and figure out how to get them what they need. And different responders, have different roles in that conversation.
Carolyn?
Yeah, so right, of course, as Stephanie was saying, it's stabilization, de-escalation, of course, assessing for medical needs if that's happening at the time of call, or if that's a part of it. Creating that rapport to then maybe help someone that, if they really do need to go to the emergency room, maybe they just need to have this conversation with an EMT and realize that that's the right thing to do. They need to know that their stuff is safe. They need to know their dog is safe, whatever the situation is. And then also, as we keep on kind of bringing up this long game thing, right? So we have this aftercare team, which is made up of peer support specialists and community health workers that will engage after the response. So there's that crisis response that comes in. Aftercare then comes, maybe they come in right after the call, maybe they come in the next day, but then they do that long-term case management, which I bring up, that can go on. And that's where we're going to see someone maybe they're ready then to go into detox. Maybe they, they're getting back on their Oregon health plan and they can get a new provider. Maybe they're looking into sheltering. A lot of these things, it's going to take 13, 19, 25 times potentially to create that relationship. So, there's not one set goal, but the hope is that our aftercare team is going to, find some goals for individuals to find them in a better place. And, we have to be honest with that. There's, folks who are chronically homeless who are not interested in shelter, but maybe we're finding a better situation for them.
Yeah. Go ahead, Dr. Allen.
I don't know if this question is appropriate, and I don't know if it's actually been handled already. I'm wondering if PCCEP has entertained the idea of asking the city and the current new monitor to put out a modification to their contract to have the current new monitor look into the period of time that covered the PSU demonstrations when there was no monitor contract.
Yeah, I can respond to that. So The independent monitor can't do that, but PCEP can make a recommendation for them to look into that, but it wouldn't just be something they do on their own. So that would be a PCEP thing. And I appreciate you bringing that up. I think that's a crucial time to look into when things were really bad. Yeah.
All right. It appears that we are out of questions and comments at this time. And I turn this over to the co-chairs, Odelia and Devontae.
Yeah. Just want to give a big thank you to everyone for being here, for your time on a Wednesday night at 8:30. It's still hard to get used to these late meetings. Just kidding. But yeah, this has been a really great conversation, and I think gave us a lot of answers and also a lot more questions. And so I hope that this will be a continued discussion, and it's really great to hear from you all as experts too, for what you see like the future looking like and what has been improving over time. I think that this conversation also speaks volumes to how much this settlement agreement did impact policy and its changes, and that changes are still needed because people are still being harmed in different ways. And so it's really exciting to think about what that future might hold, but also I think with the executive order conversation and everything fitting together, it's really also like a scary time, at least for me as a PCEP member and as a community member, for what the future holds. And yeah, I'll pass it to Devontae now because I forget what I was trying to say, but
Yeah, I just want to echo that sentiment and appreciation for everyone attending tonight, from the people from, PSR, chat, PPB, Stephanie, Counselor Canal, just everyone who, Boac. I just appreciate everyone coming because I think it is going to be a huge piece of the future steps that the city of Portland takes, and it's going to be, the collaboration is so essential for us to just make Portland a safer city and to be a city that cares about the people who reside here, regardless of what happens with the consent decree. I think that leaning into this collaboration between different agencies is going to have a positive impact overall. So I'm just appreciative of everyone coming tonight. What's next? We do have a policy and reform subcommittee meeting Wednesday, May 7th, 6 to 8 p.m. And then just kind of putting it on the radar, we do have the town hall being hosted by the Independent Monitor in collaboration with PCEP, that is supposed to be happening on May 28th, which will be a hybrid model, so both virtual and an in-person aspect as well. So hoping that everyone comes to those if possible. We look forward to having everyone attend. Thank you to the PCEP members of the public.
And I'll quickly say that policy and reform meeting, we expect that meeting will probably focus a lot on what we talked about earlier in the meeting with the settlement agreement and the executive order, and unpacking a little bit of that. So if that's a conversation that you're interested in this meeting, definitely come next week. We'll have more space for that there. And also more space at the Monitor Town Hall, because it's not just going to be about the report, it's about your general community input and issues of concern that you want the Monitor and PCEP to consider. So definitely keep that one on your radar as well, as Devontae said. Sorry, Devontae, just wanted to mention what next week's meeting was about.
No problem. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks all. Really appreciate your time, especially all the city folks who came and all of the really great community feedback we got. Yeah, have a great night.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.